Japan in 1850 was a museum, a feudal theme park, no railroads, no factories, just a warrior class carrying swords in a world that had already invented the telegraph. Fast forward 50 years, they're launching steel battleships, they're crushing the Russian Tsar's navy at the Tsushima Strait, sinking 21 ships in a single afternoon. They're colonizing their neighbors with the same clinical brutality the British used on them. And here's the kicker. They did it faster than any nation in history. The West took 3 centuries to crawl from the mud of feudalism to the steel of the industrial age. Japan, they did it in 40 years. 0 kilometers of railroad in 1868. 7,000 by 1905. From samurai swords to aircraft carriers in 2 generations. But don't buy the brochure. This wasn't a miracle. It wasn't about embracing Western values. It wasn't about freedom or democracy or any of those polite lies. It was a heist, a cold, calculated hijacking of global power. They didn't join the West. They cracked the West's source code, like hackers breaking into a bank's mainframe just to find out where the money was kept. Then they built their own vault. They played the West's game. But they played it with a ruthlessness the West didn't see coming, because the British and the Americans thought they were the teachers. They didn't realize they were the mark. This is Empire Econ, where history isn't a story, it's an autopsy of power. July 8th, 1853. Edo Bay. 4 black shadows appear on the horizon. The Japanese had never seen anything like them. No sails, just coal-black iron hulls belching thick, oily smoke. They called them Kurofune, the black ships. But these weren't just vessels. They were floating fortresses. A single American ship in that bay carried more firepower than every cannon in Japan combined. Commodore Matthew Perry didn't come with a trade proposal. He came with a letter from President Millard Fillmore. But the real message was written in the gunpowder chiseled into his cannons: open your ports, or we'll open them for you. Japan's ruling elite, the Tokugawa shogunate, had kept the country sealed for 250 years. No foreigners in, no Japanese out. It was the longest self-imposed quarantine in human history. They looked at Perry's steam-powered guns and realized their legendary katanas were now just museum pieces. But they didn't just look at the Americans. They looked west, at China. The Qing Empire, the superpower of Asia, ruling 400 million people, was being carved like a Thanksgiving turkey. The British had hooked a whole nation on opium, then went to war when China tried to ban it. The result? China lost everything. Hong Kong was gone. Shanghai was controlled by foreign banks. Beijing was burned to the ground. In the 19th century, you're either sitting at the table or you're on the menu. The shogunate did what every dying regime does. They tried to negotiate. They tried to buy time. They hoped the barbarians would just get bored and go away. They were wrong. By 1867, Japan was tearing itself apart, and samurai clans were butchering each other in the streets. The economy was in freefall. Western gunboats were circling the coast like sharks, and then a group of young samurai, most of them under 30, mid-level bureaucrats with nothing to lose, staged a coup. But here's the genius move. They didn't call it a revolution. Revolutions are messy. Revolutions get you guillotined. Revolutions scare the old money. Instead, they called it a restoration. They dusted off a 15-year-old emperor, a kid who'd been locked in a palace his whole life, dressed him up as a living god, and said, "We're not overthrowing the system, we're saving it. We're restoring the emperor's divine rule." And the moment they had power, they made a promise that would reshape the world. Fukoku Kyohei, rich country, strong military. Not freedom, not democracy, just raw, honest pragmatism. The translation was simple. We will do whatever it takes to never be China. But they had no money, no technology, no industry, and most importantly, no time. The West had a 300-year head start. Japan had maybe 20 years before the next gunboat showed up. So they asked themselves the only question that mattered: how do you rob a bank when the bank invented robbery? The answer: you study the blueprints. December 1871. The Meiji government sent half of their entire cabinet on a 2-year study abroad program. Not diplomats, not students. The actual decision-makers, ministers, future prime ministers, 107 officials in total. It was called the Iwakura mission. In reality, it was the most expensive corporate espionage operation in human history. They didn't go for the museums or the opera. They went for the guts of the system. In Washington, D.C., they ignored the talk of democracy. They wanted to know one thing: how does a federal government hold together 37 states that all want different things? The answer was a strong central authority and a weak legislature. They copied the structure but deleted the elections. In London, they skipped Buckingham Palace. They went straight to the Bank of England and the coal mines of Newcastle. They stood in the textile mills of Manchester, watching 10-year-old children work 14-hour shifts, and they took notes. One delegate, Kido Takayoshi, wrote in his diary, "The British do not rule by virtue. They rule by steam engines and central banks. The Queen is a decoration. The real empire is the machines." In Prussia, they found their blueprint. Germany wasn't a country yet. It was a collection of feudal pieces being welded together by Otto von Bismarck. The Japanese asked him how he did it. Bismarck's answer was simple: compulsory education, compulsory military service, one language, one law, no exceptions. The Japanese loved it. It was feudalism with a spreadsheet. They didn't copy the Prussian education system to create free thinkers. They copied it to create obedient soldiers who could read technical manuals. They copied the Prussian constitution because it gave the emperor absolute power while maintaining the appearance of a parliament. When the mission returned in 1873, they didn't just write a report. They wrote an instruction manual. Step 1. The government must build the economy. Why? Because Japan didn't have capitalists yet. Think of Meiji Japan as a startup with zero capital, but a massive, disciplined workforce. The government became the venture capitalist. They bought the best machines Europe had to offer: British looms, German furnaces, American telegraphs. They didn't just buy them, they reverse-engineered them. They built model factories like the Tomioka silk mill. They hired French engineers at 10 times the local salary. They forced local girls to work the machines and ran the system until they debugged it. Once a factory was profitable, once the trial and error was finished, the government sold it. But not to the highest bidder. They sold it to their friends. This created the Zaibatsu. Financial cliques is the polite term. Industrial dynasties is the accurate one. Mitsui started as a kimono shop. By 1900, they owned the mines and the banks. Mitsubishi was founded by a samurai who got rich shipping government troops. The state gave him a monopoly on mail, then shipping, then shipbuilding. By 1905, Mitsubishi had built half of Japan's navy. By 1910, 4 families controlled 70% of Japan's industry. It wasn't capitalism, it was a closed-loop system. The government gave the monopolies, the Zaibatsu built the weapons. The military conquered the markets, and the profits flowed back to the state. You know what's wild? This model still runs the world. South Korea's chaebols, Samsung, Hyundai, LG, are a direct copy-paste of the Zaibatsu. China's state-owned enterprises, same blueprint. The party replaced the emperor, but the structure is identical. State builds it, state transfers it, state controls it. The West called this crony capitalism. The East called it survival. But here is what the textbooks leave out. Every empire needs fuel. The British ran on coal, the Americans ran on oil, the Meiji Empire ran on something much cheaper. It ran on daughters. We're told the Meiji era was an enlightenment. That Japan embraced modernity. That's the brochure. Here is the receipt. To pay for those German Krupp cannons and British battleships, the Meiji government needed hard currency. Fast. Japan had no oil, no gold, no coal worth exporting. But they had something the West was obsessed with: silk. In the 1870s, silk was the semiconductor of the global economy. It paid for the steel. The steel built the guns built the empire. By 1900, silk was 42% of Japan's exports. But they don't put the producers on the commemorative stamps, because that silk was produced by children. Let me introduce you to someone. Her name was Okiku. She was 11 years old in 1875 when her father, a struggling rice farmer, received a letter. There it said the emperor needed her service. It wasn't a request. Okiku was sent to a factory 50 kilometers from home. She wouldn't see her family for 3 years. Her workday, 5 a.m. to 9 p.m., 16 hours. Her job was to stand at a boiling vat of water and plunge her bare hands into the scalding liquid to extract silk threads. Repeat 10,000 times a day. The steam kept the room at 95 degrees, humidity at 80%. Girls fainted daily. If you were too slow, you were beaten with bamboo. If you got pregnant, often by the same foremen holding the sticks, you were fired in disgrace. The average lifespan of a factory girl was 25 years. Tuberculosis, malnutrition, respiratory failure. The government called them Joko, factory women. Historians call them industrial martyrs. I call them what they were, child labour. But Okiku's father didn't have a choice either. In 1873, the government introduced the land tax reform. Before, farmers paid in rice. If the harvest failed, you paid less. After, you paid in cash, a fixed 3% of the land's value. Every year, no exceptions. Drought, pay up. Flood, pay up. To get the cash, farmers had to sell their rice even if their own children went hungry. Between 1868 and 1900, over 300,000 farmers lost their land. Where did they go? To the cities, to the factories, to the silk mills. The Meiji government didn't just tax the peasants, they engineered a famine of opportunity. They turned farmers into a landless proletariat, a ready-made, desperate workforce. It's the same playbook the British used with the Enclosure Acts. The same playbook China used during the Great Leap Forward. Step 1, destroy the old economy. Step 2, force the people into the new one. Step 3, call it progress. And what about the samurai, the men who actually started this revolution? The government threw them away like used matches. In 1876, they passed the Sword Abolishment Edict, the symbol of their identity gone with a piece of paper. Then they cut their stipends, find a job, be useful, or starve. Some became police officers, others became accountants, but you can't turn a warrior caste into clerks overnight. In 1877, Saigo Takamori, a hero of the revolution, led 20,000 samurai in a final desperate rebellion. They fought with katanas. The government sent 60,000 peasant boys armed with Gatling guns. The rebellion was crushed in 6 months. Saigo committed seppuku on a hillside surrounded by corpses. The message was clear. Tradition is a luxury. Efficiency is survival. Sentiment is suicide. The Meiji government had killed its own parents to give birth to itself, but you can't ask a girl to work 16 hours for GDP growth. You need a god. So the government invented one. They took state Shinto, a collection of folk beliefs, and weaponized it. They told the people the emperor wasn't just a leader, he was a direct descendant of the sun goddess. Literal divinity. In schools, children recited the imperial rescript, offer yourselves courageously to the state. Translation, die for us whenever we tell you to. By the 1930s, this logic became Hakko Ichiu, 8 corners of the world under one roof. Translation, a Japanese imperialism is divine destiny. Between 1868 and 1912, millions of peasants were displaced. In the wars that followed, hundreds of thousands died. Korea was annexed, its culture erased, its people turned into forced labour. The Meiji miracle cost roughly 5 million lives across Asia, by the time it reached its conclusion in 1945. Was it worth it? Ask a Tokyo salaryman in 2026 and he'll say yes. Ask a comfort woman in Nanjing and she'll give you a different answer. If she's still alive to answer. Japan took 40 years to go from swords to battleships. They improved the West's technology and exported it with violence. And when the smoke cleared in 1945, the world said, never again. But they were wrong, because 20 years later, South Korea did the exact same thing, then Taiwan, then China. The Meiji model didn't die in Hiroshima, it went global. August 15th, 1945. Emperor Hirohito's voice crackles over the radio. It's the first time most Japanese have ever heard him speak. He tells them the war situation has developed not necessarily to Japan's advantage. That is how you say we lost when you're supposed to be a living god. 2 atomic bombs, 3 million dead, every major city burned to ash. The American occupiers arrived expecting to dismantle the system. They were wrong. General Douglas MacArthur realized he needed Japan as a capitalist fortress against communism. So he kept the machine. He just changed the fuel from divine emperor to economic growth. The West looked at Japan's post-war miracle and asked, how did they do it again? The answer was simple. They never stopped. They just did it without the guns. And soon the rest of Asia was taking notes. In the 1960s, a South Korean general named Park Chung-hee staged a coup. Park had been trained in a Japanese military academy. He spoke fluent Japanese. He studied the Meiji model like a catechism. He picked national champion companies, Samsung, Hyundai, LG, and gave them the same monopolies the Meiji government gave the Zaibatsu. It was the same spreadsheet, just with different names in the cells. Taiwan did the same with semiconductors. They created TSMC not just to make chips, but to make themselves too valuable to destroy. Make yourself indispensable to the West. That is pure Meiji logic. The Meiji model didn't die in 1945. It became the dominant system for every nation trying to catch up. From Singapore to Vietnam and now even India, the blueprint is everywhere. But there is a question that should keep you awake at night. Does it still work? Japan in 2026 is facing a reckoning. Population collapse, stagnant wages, a corporate culture so rigid it stifles the very innovation it once pioneered. South Korea has the lowest birth rate on Earth. The economic miracle created a machine so efficient, so standardized, that it forgot humans aren't machines. The Meiji oligarchs looked at the West and said, "We will do whatever it takes to survive." And they did survive. Japan went from a feudal museum to a global superpower in 40 years. But survival isn't the same as thriving. You can win the race. But if the finish line is a cliff, winning just means you get there first.